There is a version of Deuteronomy sitting in a cave in the Judean desert that does not say what your Bible says. Not a typo, not a copying error, a different word in a manuscript 1,000 years older than anything scholars had before 1947. And for nearly 40 years, almost no one outside a locked room in Jerusalem was allowed to read it. That manuscript is one of more than 900 found near the Dead Sea. And the story of how they were found, then hidden again, this time by the very scholars who possessed them, starts with something almost absurdly small. A boy threw a rock into a cave. That is how it all started, on an afternoon that meant nothing to anyone at the time. Not with a scholar, not with a funded expedition, not with a university or a government or a church. A teenage Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad ed-Deeb. A flock of goats near the Dead Sea. A cave he had never noticed before, and a stone thrown in to see if anything moved. He heard something break. Not a large sound, just enough to make him pause at the mouth of the cave, unsure whether to climb down or walk away. What he found inside were clay jars. Inside the jars, wrapped in linen, were scrolls. Ancient, brittle, covered in a script he could not read. He had no idea if what he was holding was worth anything at all. He only knew it was old. He brought them back to camp. His family hung one on a tent pole for a while, not knowing what it was. That scroll turned out to be one of the most important manuscripts ever found. It was 1947. Over the following years, 11 caves in that stretch of desert would be excavated. More than 900 manuscripts would be recovered. Together they became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And for the next 40 years, a small team of scholars controlled every fragment. No other researcher could examine them. No photographs released. No complete translation. The question that nobody asked loudly enough was, why? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is something more unsettling than that. It is about what the scrolls actually contain, and what that does to ideas that millions of people have never once questioned. But before we get to what was hidden, we need to understand who hid the scrolls in the first place. Not the scholars in the 20th century. The people who sealed them into those jars 2,000 years ago. Because their story is the part that changes everything. The year is 68 AD. The Roman general Vespasian, soon to be emperor, is marching his legions south through the Jordan Valley. Jerusalem is about to fall. The temple is 2 years away from being burned to the ground. And in the desert near the Dead Sea, a community is running out of time. The historian Josephus described a Jewish sect that had withdrawn from Jerusalem, rejected the temple priesthood they considered corrupt, and built a life of strict communal discipline in the wilderness. Their rituals included shared meals. Their practice included repeated immersion in water as a form of spiritual purification. The community at Qumran fits that description almost exactly. Archaeologists excavating the site found what appears to be a scriptorium, a room where manuscripts were copied by hand. They found bronze inkwells still intact. A long stone table, possibly where scribes sat, narrow, deliberately placed near the light, built for a task that demanded patience and steady hands. Someone was copying texts here, preserving them deliberately. And when the Romans came, someone made a decision, probably in a matter of days, maybe hours. There was no time to copy everything twice, no time to argue over what mattered most and what could be left behind. They gathered what they could. Scrolls wrapped hastily in linen, stacked into clay jars, sealed, and carried up steep paths to caves in the cliffs above the settlement. Caves chosen, most likely, because they were hard to find and harder to reach. They expected to come back. They never did. The manuscripts waited in the dark for 19 centuries. Now, here is what most people are told about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They include the oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible, 1,000 years older than any manuscript that existed before 1947. When experts compared them with the medieval texts scholars had been using, the results were striking. The words were nearly identical. This was presented, correctly, as powerful evidence that the biblical text had been transmitted with remarkable accuracy across centuries. That part is true, and it is the part that gets taught in churches and documentaries. But the scrolls contain something else, something that took much longer to explain, and even longer to publish. And here is where it gets extraordinary. Cave 4. Of the 11 caves at Qumran, Cave 4 was the most significant and the most devastating. At some point, the roof had collapsed. What remained were 15,000 fragments from nearly 600 separate manuscripts scattered across a cave floor. 15,000 pieces of nearly 600 manuscripts. The team assembled to reconstruct and publish them was led by Roland Deveau, a Dominican friar and archaeologist. The team he built was small, Western, and almost entirely Christian, and they were given exclusive access to every fragment from Cave 4. No one else was allowed to see them. Picture the room where it happened. Long tables under glass. 15,000 fragments laid out like a puzzle with no picture on the box. Some no larger than a fingernail. Some so faded that the ink only surfaced under a certain slant of light. A handful of men sat over that puzzle, day after day, piecing together sentences from scraps that did not always belong to the same page, let alone the same scroll. It was slow. It was supposed to be slow. But slow, in this case, also meant something else. It meant control. Everyone outside that room, historians in London, rabbis in Jerusalem, professors who had built entire careers on the Hebrew Bible, knew the fragments existed. They knew, roughly, what some of them might say. They were not permitted to see a single one. Requests for even a single photograph were answered with silence or with a polite letter promising access once the official publication was ready. The official publication was not ready for decades. Some of the scholars who first asked to see Cave 4 were retired by the time anyone outside the inner circle got a look. Some died, waiting. That is its own kind of exile, spending a career studying a book you are told exists and are never allowed to open. The arrangement lasted from 1952 to 1991, nearly 40 years. During that time, other scholars, Jewish scholars, secular scholars, researchers from outside the narrow circle Deveau had built, requested access and were refused. The secrecy generated suspicion. Books appeared suggesting the Vatican was hiding something that would collapse Christianity. The speculation became its own industry. Then in 1991, two scholars did something audacious. A word index of the unpublished texts had been circulating unofficially. Using a computer program, Ben Zion Wacholder and Martin Abegg reconstructed the texts from that index and published them without permission. The monopoly broke, and what the academic world finally read was not a conspiracy. It was something more complicated and in some ways more interesting than anything the conspiracy theories had imagined. Because the non-biblical texts from Qumran described a Jewish community with a theology that looked strikingly uncomfortably familiar. And that is the part nobody prepares you for: the community rule, the war scroll, the Thanksgiving hymns. These are not books of the Bible. They were the internal documents of the Qumran community, their constitution, their prayers, their vision of the end of days. Read them together, and a picture emerges that reshapes what most people think they know about the origins of Christianity. The community at Qumran expected a Messiah. In fact, they expected two: a priestly Messiah and a royal Messiah. The idea of a coming anointed figure who would restore Israel was not invented by the early church. It was already present, already debated, already central to Jewish life decades before Jesus was born. The community practiced ritual immersion, full-body bathing in water as a symbol of spiritual cleansing, not once, but repeatedly. This predates John the Baptist. It was already established among this desert sect. The community held sacred communal meals, but the community rule does not describe something casual. It lays out an order, almost like choreography. Who reaches for the bread first? Who blesses the wine before anyone drinks? Who is permitted to speak and who sits in silence until spoken to? The priest reaches first. Always the priest. Only after his hand moves toward the bread do the others take their portion, seated in a strict line that runs by rank, a line that never breaks, meal after meal, year after year. It was not just dinner, it was rehearsal. The community believed history was rushing toward a final battle, and after that battle, a banquet, a real one, physical, at a real table, presided over by the Messiah himself. Every meal they shared in the wilderness was a dress rehearsal for that day. Get the order right now, and you would know how to take your place when it finally mattered. Bread, wine, a fixed structure, presided over by a priest, practiced until it became instinct. The pattern in the community rule scroll, the bread first, the wine second, the priest at the head of the line, echoes something else. Something that happened in an upper room in Jerusalem, decades later, the night before an execution. Christians would later call it the Last Supper, and the language. The war scroll divides humanity into two camps, the sons of light and the sons of darkness. That phrase, sons of light, appears in the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of John is saturated with light versus darkness imagery. None of this is coincidence. And none of it means what the sensational versions of this story claim. The scrolls do not prove Christianity was fabricated. Scholars who have spent careers on this material do not say that. What they say is this: what the scrolls reveal is the world Jesus was born into. Not a vacuum, not a blank slate waiting for a new idea. A world already saturated with messianic expectation, ritual purification, communal sacred meals, and the language of light and darkness. Jesus did not arrive from nowhere. He spoke into a conversation that was already happening. If this kind of investigation, going back to the actual manuscripts, the actual archaeology, the actual history, is what you come here for, subscribe. We do this every week, and there is no Sunday school version of what we find. And when you understand that, when you read the Gospels against the backdrop of what was found in those caves, certain things that always seemed obscure become suddenly almost shockingly clear, including one detail that lives in the oldest manuscripts we have. And almost nobody notices it. Here is a question most people have never thought to ask. The Bible you own was translated from manuscripts. Those manuscripts were copied from earlier manuscripts, which were copied from earlier ones. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest manuscripts we have of most Old Testament books, 1,000 years older than anything that existed before 1947. And they do not always say the same thing, not dramatically, not in ways that overturn the whole narrative, but in specific, precise places. Places where the difference is small enough that most translations smooth it over, and significant enough that scholars have argued about it for decades. Take the Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, the song Moses sings about Israel's destiny. In the version most people read, based on medieval manuscripts, verse 8 says God divided the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. The Dead Sea Scrolls say something different. They say God divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Sons of God, not sons of Israel. The ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, used by the earliest Christian communities, also says sons of God. What that phrase means and why the wording differs between manuscripts, and when that change happened, that debate runs through thousands of pages of scholarship. It has not been resolved. But before 1947, most scholars did not even know there was a variant. The medieval text was assumed to be the text. The Dead Sea Scrolls made the question visible. And then there is this. At Qumran, more copies of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees were found than copies of some books that are in the Bible today. These were not curiosities to the people at Qumran. They were sacred. They were copied alongside Isaiah and Psalms and Deuteronomy. Enoch is not in the Protestant Bible. It is not in the Catholic Bible. But Jude, the New Testament letter of Jude, chapter 1, quotes directly from Enoch and treats it as prophecy. The author of Jude considered Enoch scripture. The Dead Sea Scrolls show that this was not unusual. In the world of Second Temple Judaism, the boundaries of what counted as sacred text were not yet fixed. The canon was still being decided. It was decided by people, in specific places, at specific moments in history, for specific reasons. Which means the book sitting on your nightstand is not just a text. It is the result of a decision made by fallible people in a specific century, choosing which voices counted as the Word of God and which did not. That is not a reason to distrust it, but it is a reason to know its history. Because for 2,000 years, most people never got the chance. Muhammad ed-Dib went back to the cave the next day. He and a cousin took more jars, more scrolls. They brought them to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem, who paid them almost nothing. The scrolls passed through several hands. An archbishop eventually brought 4 of them to the United States, hoping to sell them. He could not find a buyer for years. In 1954, he placed a classified advertisement in the Wall Street Journal. It read, "Biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC are for sale." An Israeli archaeologist named Yigael Yadin arranged the purchase, but the deal itself could not happen in the open. Israel and its neighbors were barely years removed from war, and a discovery like this, 4 of the oldest and most complete biblical manuscripts on earth, was not just an academic prize. It was leverage, national pride, possibly a diplomatic incident if the wrong government learned who was buying before the deal closed. So the negotiation happened in the shadows. Intermediaries met in New York, in rented rooms, exchanging offers without either side confirming who was actually behind them. If word leaked that an Israeli archaeologist was buying, on behalf of a state only a few years old, the price could triple overnight, or the sale could collapse entirely under the weight of politics. It closed quietly, $250,000. 4 scrolls that had been sealed inside a clay jar in a desert cave for 2,000 years changed hands, not at an auction house, not in a museum boardroom, but through go-betweens working off a classified ad in a newspaper. No fanfare, no press conference, just a wire transfer, a handshake, and manuscripts that had outlasted the Roman Empire, the fall of Jerusalem, and 19 centuries of silence, finally quietly coming home. Those scrolls are now in Jerusalem, in a museum built specifically to house them. 2,000 years in a clay jar in a desert cave. Then a classified ad in a business newspaper. That is the actual history of the most significant biblical manuscripts ever discovered. And here is what the history asks of anyone willing to sit with it. The texts that form the foundation of 3 major world religions were not handed down in an unbroken chain from heaven to paper. They were written by people, copied by people, argued over by people, sealed into jars by people who never came back for them, sold for almost nothing by a teenager who did not know what he was holding. That does not make them less significant. The Isaiah scroll, more than 7 meters long, every chapter intact, 1,000 years older than anything previously known, confirmed that the transmission was remarkably accurate. But the other scrolls, the community rule, the war scroll, the manuscripts where the wording differs, the books that were sacred at Qumran and are not sacred anywhere today, they do something different. They show that the story of how the Bible became the Bible is itself a story worth knowing, and most people have never heard it. If this changed how you see the Bible in your hands, send this to the person who thinks it fell from heaven exactly as it is, unchanged, and to the person who thinks that means it cannot be trusted at all. Neither one has heard this story. You can be the one who tells them. Next week, we are going back to archaeology. In 1968, construction workers in Jerusalem discovered a tomb. Inside one of the bone boxes, they found a heel, still attached to an iron nail, bent at the tip from where it had struck wood on the other side. It was the first physical evidence ever found of a Roman crucifixion. And what it reveals about how Jesus died is not what anyone expected. Subscribe if you want to be there for that one. And if you have been watching for a while, what is the one thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls that surprised you most? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. This video was made possible by you. Every episode takes many hours of research, digging through archaeological records, ancient manuscripts, and sources most people never see. If you want to support this work and go deeper, you can join the hidden archives on our membership page. Members get access to the full research behind every episode, the sources, the original texts, the details that don't fit in a 20-minute video. It is the unseen layer beneath the unseen Bible. But please, don't feel obligated. Watching this video, leaving a comment, sharing it with someone, that already matters more than you know. We are grateful you are here.